G'day everyone, Viv here. I hope you're all keeping well. Welcome back. I'm here in the main hobby area at Knights of Dice, but we're going to head down the back soon to the casting room. As I mentioned in my previous video, I'm about to launch a Kickstarter campaign to fund the development of some production molds for my range of fantasy miniatures that Anton Ducrot from Flytrap Factory sculpted for me back in 2018. I did run a Kickstarter for it in 2019, but I cancelled that. I can't remember why. Anyway, during that video, I'd mentioned that I might go through the mold making process. Might go through the mold making process. And so I thought, whilst we go down the back and start, organizing the casting room, let's take the cameras down and we'll have a little bit of a ramble and get this series started. So let me know how much detail you want. I've tried to film this so many times now. I'm filming this intro after the last take down the back, and I know that it turned into a bit of a disjointed ramble. You let me know in the comments how much detail you want. Let me know what questions you've got about the mold making or casting process. That will help me keep these videos a little bit on track. I might make some shorter ones. What's the difference between a production mold and a master mold? For example, I might make shorter little videos specifically about some of those subjects. I found it very difficult to find information about, this process. And I know that, other people that I've spoken to aren't really happy to share their information because, they're worried about competition or other people setting up businesses or whatever. I love to teach, I love to learn, and the best way to do both of those is for me to share my videos and get feedback from people who actually know what they're doing, who have been trained or have worked as an apprentice. Everything I've done has been by trial and error. But let's stop stuffing around here and make our intro bigger than it needs to be. Let's head down the back to the casting room and start getting into this new series on taking a miniature from concept to metal. So here we are in the casting room down the back of the warehouse here at Knights of Dice. This is the third time I've tried to film this bit. I'm not sure how much detail to go into. There's so many different processes and so many different methodologies in terms of taking a miniature from a sculpt through to being cast in metal that in the previous attempts, I just lost the flow of what I was talking about. And anyway, there's a whole bunch to consider. So if you're interested to know more about this, please let me know in the comments, and that will, let me know in which direction I need to go. But just very quickly, let's start off with, the concept of having a miniature sculpted by a sculptor. Let's say that material they've used is green stuff. There's loads of different things that miniatures can be made from. Not all of them can go into a vulcanizing machine to make a spin casting mold. Some of them will need to be mastered first. You'll often see little indie developers talking about resin masters. Now, this figure here, this little one here, has already been vulcanized and so has changed color. But this was a miniature sculpted purely out of green stuff. This one was by Anton Ducrot from Flytrap Factory, and it's changed color because it's been vulcanized at 163 degrees under 3,000 pounds of pressure. We'll talk about vulcanizing a little bit later on. But let's say that the miniature that you've made is entirely made out of green stuff or another type of vulcanizable material. There's a couple of ways that we can go to metal from here. One is to make an RTV, a silicon mold. This is just a very simple mold made in a cup as my form. It's a single piece mold, and then it's been cut and opened to allow me to get the miniature out of there. This is also another RTV silicon mold in a slightly different type of silicon, but again, it's been cut and split open. Oh, the birds today are wonderful. I don't know if you can hear them. It was 6 degrees when I came in this morning and the birds are out there loving it. This has also been made in an RTV silicon and then cut, and access to the miniature is available. So the first thing is I can either make an RTV silicon mold of this, which allows me to create duplicate copies of that miniature. Let's say, for example, somebody sent me, I don't provide molding and casting services to the general public. But let's say you had sculpted something, you'd sent it off to your molder and caster and said, I want a mold of this miniature. Now, typically when you create a mold, there'll be multiple miniatures in it, or multiple copies of a miniature. This mold has a bunch of different figures, one copy of each figure. It is what I would consider a master mold. I could use it for production, but I'm only going to get one copy of each figure out of there. That's fine. Sometimes you can just run molds like that and you'll be perfectly fine. But let's say I had my little figure, sent it off to the molder and caster and said, I want a spin casting mold of this. Well, we can't straight away. This is an unvulcanized organic rubber blank so far. Nothing inside it hasn't been vulcanized. I can only put one copy of that miniature in this mold and put it in the vulcanizer. How do I get more copies of it? Well, there's a couple of different ways, and the most common is to make a mold of that miniature. This little man would be molded inside here. This is not his mold. He'd be molded inside there. Then I can cut the mold open, take the miniature out, and then cast multiple copies of that figure in a vulcanizable resin. So when you see indie manufacturers talking about resin masters, that is generally what they're talking about. They've had their sculpt mastered in RTV silicon, generally, and then made in a castable, or a vulcanizable resin. Not all resins can be vulcanized. Again, we're talking about temperatures of 160 degrees plus at 3000 PSI under pressure as the mold makes. We'll talk about creating molds a little bit later on. Again, this is where I was saying just before, there's so much information. I don't know how much I should go into to keep these videos, short and interesting without, sitting through, a university lecture on the, processes and methodology of mold making and casting. Not that I'd be qualified to deliver that anyway, but here we go. You let me know in the comments how much detail you want. And if you do find this interesting, please click that like button, subscribe if you want to see more. It does help keep me motivated to, take the time to produce these videos. So I have my little man. I've only got one little man. I want to create a mold. A mold will typically have 12 figures in it. Sometimes it can have a little bit more, sometimes it will have less, but for a typical wargaming figure of, fairly undynamic sort of posing, they will, generally you'll fit 12 of these in a mold. I've sent this off to be molded. The caster and the molding and casting company will come back and say, we can master that, Viv, create 12 copies of that in a vulcanizable resin, stick that into one of our molds and pop that inside our vulcanizer and create your mold. There you go. You'll now have a master mold, which has a limited lifespan, and a vulcanized production mold. That's fairly typical process. If you have a different process that you use, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. And part of the reason again for sharing these videos is for me to learn from other people who have more legitimacy and experience in this part of our market. Let's say, for example, I had 12 figures done. Let's grab that mold again. I had 12 figures, I sent them off and said, make a mold. There's a couple of different options. I can skip this step, the RTV silicon master step, if my figures have been made out of green stuff or a vulcanizable material. And I had 12 figures around about that would fit into one mold, like this one. I can then take those masters directly into a vulcanized spin casting mold and create this. It is a replacement for lots of these little ones here, because I've got enough miniatures to fill a full mold. Now that I've got this mold, do I want to run this for my production batches? Again, I'm going to get one copy of every figure in this mold. Or do I want to create a production mold? Now, as I said before, when I showed this mold, I'd consider this a master mold. It's got how many figures? 4, 8, 12. Oh, this one's got 16 figures in it. They're all fairly slim, undynamic figures. Between 12 to 16 normally is what you'll fit. I normally do most of my molds with 12. It depends. I now have a mold, a master mold, that I can use to create multiple copies of this miniature and then split each of those figures up into one mold per figure or into sets. Most sets, and I mentioned this in my previous video, that most manufacturers will sell come in 4 figures. Why? Because 4 is nicely divisible by 12 or 16. And so in a production mold, I would have 3 copies of each figure. Let's say I had a pack of 4, right? We're talking about packs of 4. I would have 3 copies of each figure. 3 times 4 is 12. 4 figures in my pack, 3 copies of that miniature in a mold, gives me 3 copies of each miniature every time I spin this. Why is that preferable over having a mold that just has 1 copy of each figure in it? Is because if I spin this mold and for whatever reason, one of these figures doesn't come out properly and I need that figure to put in a pack that a customer has bought, I have to spin the whole mold again. And then again and again, and it is more economical to have a production mold made where you have multiple copies of every figure in that mold, so that when you spin it, ideally you're getting 100%, from it. But sometimes things can go wrong, if your settings have changed on your casting machine, you've used a different pressure or a different speed or whatever because you run a different sort of mold or whatever. The figures doesn't come out, one figure doesn't come out, I'll still have other copies of that figure. Anyway, so the purpose of this video is just an introduction to how does my figure, the life cycle of a miniature, how does it go from green to metal, and what is the process? And like I said, there's lots of different sorts of options, there's lots of different methodologies, and I don't really want to shoot this again, so you let me know in the comments how much detail do you want, and I'll see what I can do to accommodate that. But I think for today, that'll be it. I might sit down and write up some notes and script a few things so I can keep myself focused a little bit, because like I said, there's a lot to consider, and if I don't have a clear idea of where I want to go and how I want to do this, it'll just be a whole bunch of this up and down, flowing here and there. But as a general introduction, welcome to taking a miniature from cast to metal. You let me know how much detail you want and I'll do my best to oblige. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you soon. See ya.